Hello. Today we're going to talk about something that honestly, when I started learning about astrology, was like unfathomable to me. Like completely and utterly. And that is houses in astrology. So if you ever want a really good resource for like anything about astrology, I absolutely recommend this book right here. This book is absolutely fantastic. It really is the only one you're going to need because it explains everything in fantastic detail. So when we think about these three main pieces of astrology, the planets, the signs, and the houses, you can think of it kind of like this. The planet themselves signifies the topic, right? The subject. So for instance, Mercury, being the planet of communication, it's all about, intellectual thought. It's about technology, communicating ideas, and, just the general method of communication, that desire to connect with and communicate ideas to other people. What sign it's in, say for instance, if you had a Virgo Mercury, you might be very analytical, you might express things clearly and to the point, you might express things in a way that is very grounded and stable, but still very effective. That Virgo dictates how that need for communication comes through. And the houses dictate where in your life this theme of communication and its method of use is most prominent, because that is exactly what the houses are. The 12 houses of astrology are quite literally the places in your life, the existential arenas, as Joanna calls them in the only astrology book you'll ever need. What she means by that is that each one of these 12 houses dictates a different thing that you're going to be going through in life. The first one being all about your physical appearance, your goals, your kind of center self, and how you come off to other people. The second house is of, material possessions, how you gather wealth, what areas in your life are going to be suitable for gathering wealth. The third house is communication. The fourth, your home life. Fifth is creativity. Sixth, health and service, so on and so forth. And you can see that as you continue going through, they shift from being very focused on yourself, right? Your appearance, your goals, your communication style, to starting to being shifted on other people. So the 10th house, for instance, is all about your career and your public life. The 11th house is about your friendships and your hopes and dreams for your life. The 12th house is about, endings, undoings, the things that are really gonna challenge you in this world and make you struggle. I've also seen two radically different areas of thought on what it means for a house to be empty. So if we look at a sample chart here, you can see that some of these houses don't have any planets or signs in them. In Vedic astrology, this means that that's an area that you might have some struggles in life, where you're not going to have any kind of celestial body assistance, any kind of drive or desire there. And in very different schools of thought, that actually signifies a place where you already learned a lesson in that area and you don't really need to think about it. I lean to the second school of thought because if we remember how we define planet signs and houses, if you have a house that is empty, and by that there is no planet, so no impulse, and no sign, meaning no expression of the impulse, then there's nothing you're really trying to do in that area. Overall, though, there's nothing to worry about with empty houses. If anything, you want to play it by your strengths and look at where you do have planets in the houses, what these planets are trying to get you to do, how they're trying to get you to do it, and where they're trying to get you to do it. And of course, in the standard chart, right, as in like the standard wheel of the year, Aries is the first sign. And that means that Aries also rules the first house. So the house of the self and one's, just core being, the way they come off, the way they express themselves, how they look, that's all Aries in a traditional set. But when you start looking at your own personal birth chart, you'll notice that rarely is it ever actually Aries that defines your first house. When you look at a personal chart, what defines your first house is your rising sign. So for example, I'm a Sagittarius rising. That means Sagittarius is the ruler of my specific first house. However, because Sagittarius traditionally, just like in the grand scheme of things, rules the 9th house, a lot of those 9th house qualities end up very present in my life. The 9th house rules mental exploration and travel. I love traveling, and I love to learn new things about cultures, people, history, all that kind of stuff. Not only is it because Sagittarius is my rising sign and therefore dictating my first house with all those goals and ambitions, but it's also because my sun sign, or the core of my being, is also in my personal 9th house. No matter where I go, Sagittarius 9th house energy is very prevalent. Another thing that I like that Joanna does in this book especially is kind of see all the different ways that you can group houses. So you might group them as houses that focus on the self. You might think of them as houses that focus on other people and how you interact with them. You might think about them as houses of endings. You might think about them as houses of, personal life versus external life. There's a lot of different ways to group those houses, but my favorite is to think of it this way. When you have a standard chart, everything on the left is how you impact the world, and everything on the right is how the world impacts you. Everything on the top half is your public life and how the general public perceives you. Everything on the bottom half is how you are to your most intimate private settings, your home, your family, anything like that. And so, of course, you might notice that people with a lot of planets in the left side are very focused on what they're doing for the world, what they're doing in the world. And people with a lot of planets on the right side don't really need to be in the limelight. They're much happier to just be focused and at home. This is a pretty big topic and it's a lot to think about, and that's why I think that getting resources like this book to explain it is going to be the best thing for you. But in general, houses are pretty important. They're a lot more important than I thought. A lot of people are always looking at astrology, looking at their sun sign only, and saying, well, this doesn't match me at all. And it's because it's not really telling you anything. The sun sign isn't even what was considered your actual sign back in the day. It was your rising sign, which makes a lot of sense because I act a lot more like a Sagittarius than I do a Virgo. But the sun sign is the very core of your being. It's the canvas everything else is falling on. So if everything's falling on a Virgo canvas, it's going to look a lot different than if it were falling on a Cancer canvas. Likewise, that sun, that core of my being falling in my 9th house, along with my Sagittarius rising, means that travel, exploration, philosophy, all these other kinds of things remain recurring themes in my life. They remain things that are at the center of everything I do and want. And for me personally, my chart, I don't have any planets in 4th, 5th, or even 6th houses. It seems that whatever's going on with my, home life or my creative endeavors or my even job and health don't really seem to be that big of an issue, I guess. Let's take a look at this sample chart, for instance. This is the chart of someone who was born today at 12 p.m. in Providence, Rhode Island. This person has their sun also in the 9th house, under Scorpio. Now, for me as a person with the sun in Virgo in the 9th house, I take a very analytical approach to things. I'm very much like facts and only the facts, ma'am. I really like to look at how these things kind of blend together historically, culturally, all these other kinds of things. I like to see the practicality in cultural customs and other things like that. Scorpio is a sign that is either ruled by Pluto or Mars, both of which are very volatile planets. And in that, this person might be very interested in mental exploration and travel, but it's going to be a lot more about finding this deeper kind of esoteric meaning to things. This more mystical side, this more maybe even existential side, because Pluto being the planet of death and violent rebirth, there's going to be a lot there with that. A lot of philosophy around why we're here and what we're doing. And therefore, as you can see, it works all together. Your planet, the core of your being, the way it expresses itself through its sign, and then the house that it does the most expressing in. I also notice a moon in Cancer in the 5th house, which means any kind of creative endeavors or even children this person has, they're going to be dealing with a parent that has a lot of feelings, but also a lot of intuitive, kind of sentimental, maybe even more artistic kind of qualities. Whether or not that's good or bad for the kids depends on how evolved they are as a Cancer moon and how well they can handle all of those very big, dramatic feelings. It's also good because Cancer is the mother of the zodiac, actually, so if they're having kids, they've already got this very motherly, comforting kind of radiance if they manage to work on that. But the last thing we do have to talk about is the two styles of house system. One is called the Placidius, which is what we were just looking at. It's when every house, as you can see, is a different size. Some are massive, some are kind of thinner. That's all kind of depending on how Placidius calculates that. And then the next one is whole house, in which they purposely make every single house the same size and then plot accordingly on that. There are pros and cons to both, and the pros of the Placidius is that you can get a bit more accurate of a reading depending on the actual chart of the sky, right? You can get like actual degrees of houses, you know, things like that. You can get all of that better represented without having to forcibly manipulate how they actually are divided by the math itself. The cons is that it's a lot harder to read, like a lot harder. As you can see, some houses kind of cross into different signs. Sometimes there's more than one house in one sign. It's messy. The pros of something like whole house, in which you can see that this pattern in the middle is still very similar to Placidius, is that it's a lot easier to read. Every single sign starts and ends on its own house. There's no confusion about what's going on there. The cons, though, are that this can radically change the accuracy of the planets. So for me, like, my Placidius is a lot more accurate than my whole house. When I start looking at my whole house, hell, when you start looking at these two things side by side, you can see how some things that were in the 9th house in the Placidius are now in the 10th house in the whole house, which radically changes the entire meaning of the chart, in my opinion. It changes where these things pop up in your life over the course of the whole thing. I think the most balanced approach is looking at both, seeing which is like more of a trend you can actually figure right now. Like for me, that sun in 9th house is a lot more sense than if it were stuck in my 10th house like it is in whole house system. 10th house doesn't really have much to do with me, to be honest, especially in that sun Virgo setting. So it's up to you to kind of chart both, look at them, and see which one makes more sense. Personally, I would stick with the traditional Placidius, but it's up to you. And especially when it comes to like my tarot journals and stuff, obviously they can't guess what your house separation is going to be, so then you have to use whole house for that. But in the end, houses are really not that complicated. I know we just talked a lot about Placidius versus whole house and, you know, different ways to divide the houses, life and death and public and personal and all these other things, but the truth is, all it does is tell you the when. Your sign telling you the how, and your planet telling you the what. When you think of it that way, it's a lot easier to kind of parse that information, because now you know that if you've got a bunch of planets in the 4th house, that there are a lot of things that are going to influence how you deal with your home life and your family life. If you know that there are a bunch of planets in your 10th house, you know that you're going to have a lot of influence in that public career life, that whole mask you're putting on to other people for them to see the you that you want them to see. Pay attention to what signs and planets are all up in that house. Houses are just the times in which things happen, whether it's in the early part of your life, whether it's in the later part of your life, whether it's in public or private. That's all it's trying to tell you. And when you put all those informations together, you get a much fuller picture than if you just kind of go look up your sun sign and that's it. So, with that in mind, I will see you guys around next week for a little bit more talk on what gods are. And with that, I will see you around. So, later. By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out.